So the pit is a thing. Not an endless pit or a pit of despair, or, well, actually, given the content, maybe that's not far off the mark. The Pit is this wild new medical drama that takes its inspiration from the classic procedural show ER and smashes that into the story structure and style of 24. At face value, this sounds like the show could jump the shark right off the bat, but the storytelling is pretty reserved. Sort of. It's still an emergency department in a medical hospital. Lives are on the line! I first heard about The Pit earlier this year. I'm always looking for new stuff to watch, and I read that The Pit was getting great reviews from audiences. So I went looking for it and found out that it was being released weekly on HBO Max, or whatever it's called. But I like to binge things in one sitting. I know this is a problem in itself for viewer numbers, but I am what I am, ADHD and all. Also, I wasn't about to deal with Max, or whatever it's called. So I waited for the show to finish, and then I binged it in 1 week, and it was brilliant, but also difficult and exhausting, but for all the right reasons. You really get an understanding that some of these characters have seen and done a lot, and while that's admirable, it's also more than a little heartbreaking. These senior healthcare providers are competent and caring professionals who are attempting to impart medical wisdom to their students while protecting them from the trauma or desensitization of the job. The show also does a really great job of showing how emergency medicine is very improvisational. You have to know a lot of information, but every case is different and status can change in an instant.
That's what we gave them.
Treat the patient, not the protocol.
For the characters in the show, a lot of what they're seeing is normal for them. That's one of the things that makes this show so brilliant. It normalizes what an ER is like for audiences to witness. The show doesn't care if you keep up or remember names. It expects you to keep the characters straight, just like a doctor needs to remember patients. Characters bump into each other, jargon is thrown around, and the show rarely stops to explain things. It conveys how chaotic and unpolished this kind of work is. It's messy, and it's real. The burnout, the pressure from management and patients, and the need to show competence when everything is falling apart is what these healthcare providers do, and thrive on in some cases. And that's not even mentioning the kind of injuries they see. Oh, I'm gonna have to be careful about what I show here, because some of it is bloody.
Oh yeah, that's scary. Yep.
But this is what makes the show so amazing. We've seen shows focus on doctor drama or medicine or show injuries, but they all tend to be polished for television. I don't really want to see the injuries or how hard it is on doctors, but that's the reality of working in the ER. This show is about emergency medicine and healthcare as a whole and how it is arduous and frankly terrifying. The show does this by highlighting loneliness, personal responsibility, resilience, and healthcare outcomes. Through the 15-episode runtime, the show depicts how these factors affect not just patients, but nurses, doctors, social workers, bystanders, caregivers, EMS personnel, and frontline staff. And so today, I want to talk about The Pit. In the intro, I mentioned that the show was like ER mixed with 24, which is true. The show stars Noah Wyle, who's most famous for his lead role in ER, but here he's also a producer along with the writers and creators of ER. The executive and creative team is so similar with ER that there is a speculation that The Pit was originally conceived of as a reboot of that show, with Wyle reprising his iconic role as Dr. John Carter. The similarities are so close that there's an ongoing lawsuit between the series creators and the owners of ER, the estate of Michael Crichton. You know, the guy who made Jurassic Park. We may never know the truth, but the show was picked up early in 2024 by Warner Brothers for their streaming service Max, or whatever it's called. The show has a main cast of 10 actors with a massive roster of supporting and recurring characters. This includes many patients and family members, some of who were given prominent roles throughout the entirety of the season. The cast went through an extensive medical boot camp so that they not only understood the medical information they would be expected to deliver as their characters, but also to look competent and professional in performing medical procedures. For certain operations, the cast would rehearse under medical consultants for hours before the cameras were turned on to ensure the action and medicine were accurate. I know they didn't do any actual labs or practical lessons on real people, but you have to wonder how much they know. You think they could give a med student a run for their money? The show premiered in January 2025 with a 2-part opener and was immediately praised. It was renewed for a second season in February, not that that's surprising, but the announcement came before the second half of the show was released, and that has some crazy developments in it. The first season concluded on April 10th, but with the lawsuit, it's unclear how long it will take until season 2 is released. There's no way I can cover everything that happens in the show. I probably won't even get to all of the main cast, but I'm gonna cover the important bits of the first season, and that means this is your spoiler warning. And also, just a safety check because the show doesn't pull any punches about things like death, suicide, assault, or violence. The Pitt opens with Dr. Michael Robbie Rabinovich walking to the ER at Pittsburgh Trauma Medical Hospital. Before his shift officially begins, he checks in with his charge nurse, Dana, who asks him how he's holding up given today is the anniversary of his mentor's death during COVID. She then directs him to the doctor in charge of the night shift. Robbie finds Dr. Jack Abbott, aka the best character, on the roof contemplating the point of existence and the futility of working in the ER when it feels like the world is falling apart.
Ignore him. He had a rough night. And is having an ongoing existential crisis.
Don't worry, you'll get there soon enough.
As the shift begins, Robbie is introduced to his new medical students.
Trinity Santos, intern.
Victoria Giavatti, MS3.
Dennis Whitaker, MS4.
And then we're introduced to the other doctors Frank Langdon, Cassie McKay, Heather Collins, Samira Mohan, and the new resident Melissa King, aka the second best character. Each of these characters attempts to find their footing in the chaos of the ER while learning as much as they can. Whitaker loses a patient while getting all sorts of stuff on his scrubs, like medicine, I'll show that, blood, I'll show the after effects, and pee, super not showing that. Other characters deal with a miscarriage, familial pressure, interpersonal drama, and one of them is even on parole. Meanwhile, they treat patients with injuries as simple as a burnt hand to a full body burn. The characters juggle many patients at once as they deal with treatment, testing, and families. Early on, a mother comes in with her son under the pretense of being sick. However, she does this because her son has written down a list of girls, and she is afraid that he is going to hurt someone. Unfortunately, the kid flees before Robbie can talk with him properly. The healthcare providers move their way through waiting room patients, like a trans woman who cut her arm, to full-on emergencies, like the drowning of a little girl. We then watch as these doctors have to deal with the fallout of having to tell loved ones what has happened. As if that wasn't enough, Nurse Dana is punched in the face by a disgruntled patient. Robbie is constantly at odds with the chief medical officer over patient satisfaction scores and the potential for the ER to be terminated or taken over by a corporate healthcare operator. Towards the end of the season, we find out there has been a mass shooting, and Pittsburgh Trauma Medical goes into triage mode. Fucking only in the United States. The show then spends the next 3 episodes exploring what a mass casualty shooting looks like from the point of view of the ER doctors. Also, Dr. Jack Abbott comes back.
Brother, I'm so fucking glad to see you.
This is really compelling television. It's chaotic, gruesome, and very sobering, but it's utterly captivating. Hours after their shift ends, we see characters attempting to finish up with their patients so they can go home before they have to come in and do it all over again. Before diving into the philosophy, I think it's worth pointing out how and why the show structure matter. Instead of a procedural episodic format with an overarching plot, The Pitt follows its characters through one 15-hour shift in the ER, with each episode consisting of 1 hour of that shift. It's basically the same amount of plot as 15 regular episodes, but instead of being wrapped up nicely at the end of an episode, medical cases are chopped up and strewn out across the entirety of the show. Intermingled with these are the personal lives and interpersonal drama of the characters. This affects a lot of why the show is so effective. Firstly, it shows the exhaustion of having to work and remember and adapt to all that goes on across a 15-hour shift. Just watching this show is exhausting. Secondly, for the patients, we do not always get nice endings. This is nothing new for medical dramas. Death is a part of the medical practice, but this show differs in that some cases are not completed when the season ends because the shift is over for us, the audience, too. Doctors may care, but they need to learn to let go. As a result, some of the emergency patients who need operations are sent to the operating rooms, and another part of the hospital takes over. These stories do not always conclude satisfactorily because the caregivers, and by extension we, the audience, do not see the conclusion of that medical journey. The show itself ends in a way where characters just go home or pick up on their personal lives. It's not that it's unsatisfying, it's just that medical care is ongoing and it doesn't make for neat stories all the time. This 15-hour shift season means that once the show is over, we, the audience, have to be okay with leaving the characters the same way the healthcare providers have to leave their patients. The season has ended, but the journey and need for healthcare marches ever onward. The fact that Dr. Robbie continues to have flashbacks to COVID is incredibly telling. It's not just about his character arc, but also about the individuation and disconnection that occurred during COVID. When isolation went into effect, it did its job of separating people physically, but of course it also had mental repercussions. People became much more distant with each other, and interactions were limited. Social circles devolved, and online connection was sometimes the only way to connect to other people. Essential frontline workers experienced this, but were also expected to continue their jobs. Healthcare workers had to limit connection and time with patients, which made for difficult and worse care in a lot of cases. Not to mention the risk of getting injured or sick. Dr. Robbie's trauma comes from the fact that he lost his mentor to COVID during the peak of the disaster. We only see brief moments of the ER during COVID, and sure, the current ER is crazy, but those flashbacks are incredibly telling about how disconnected doctors must have felt. Also exploited and alienated, but we'll get to that. So COVID ended and everything got better, right? Well, no, that isolation didn't really go away at all. The effects of the isolation and separation are still ongoing. Perhaps for some, it got better when reconnection occurred, but for others, the scars are long-lasting. The Pitt shows us that there is an absurd amount of people who feel lonely and are incapable of asking for help, as in, they lack the ability or resources to understand that they need help or that something is in fact wrong. A significant number of patients who come through the ER in the show are those who feel that they have nowhere else to go, people who have fallen through the cracks, as it were. A woman caring for a mother who is overwhelmed, a homeless mother trying to give her children a moment of joy, a young girl possibly being trafficked, a homeless man looking for food, whatever Myrna is.
Hey, fruitcake.
And the list goes on. It's not that every one of these things would happen in a single shift in the ER, but that any one of them could happen, and they do happen regularly. So why is it that people keep falling through the cracks? Well, free healthcare would probably help. But this isn't just an issue in the United States, but something much more widespread. As a society, we've made great leaps in the understanding of our biology, and as a result, we've been able to translate that into epic strides in medicine and healthcare. In just the last 50 years, we've made leaps and bounds in research around cancer and vaccinations. It's truly incredible, and I don't want to undercut that, but there is a dark side. The neoliberal capitalist system that has created the atmosphere for these kinds of technological advances has also led to us correlating things like lifestyle choices to health risks. Choosing to smoke or maintain a high fat or sodium diet directly impacts your health, and this is true for sure. No one is doubting that research. The problem is that this causes blame to be shifted to individual responsibility. Not everyone is responsible for their own health. When someone becomes sick or injured, we have a tendency to ask what they did to cause such an outcome. We forget that our meat sacks are incredibly vulnerable. To be alive is to get sick. If you're fortunate, those moments are few and far between, but biology, the process, not the study, is not precise. Stuff goes wrong all the time, from the very moment you are born. I'm sure you can find something about your body that is out of the ordinary. Things like being double jointed or having a trick knee. The top of my left ear doesn't curl down all the way. But nobody would accuse you or me of having caused such a thing. The same goes for injury. Some jobs are inherently risky, but necessary. Across the 15 episodes, we see people come in who have sustained injuries during the course of their jobs. We even see Wilker get injured. Sure, many injuries are preventable, but risks will always exist. As long as people are living, there is risk. But what about people who choose high-risk behavior or lifestyles? Are they not putting themselves in unnecessary risk? Good point, rhetorical device to Janglez. Maybe we ought to make those people take responsibility for their health, but I don't think the answer is so cut and dry. Poor people are often malnourished or incapable of taking time to exercise. Should we blame them for being poor? Don't you fucking dare say yes! I have similar arguments for addiction, which can include fat and sugar. Addiction can be the culmination of hereditary, environmental, and psychological factors, which makes individual responsibility very dangerous as it can leave vulnerable people in a lurch. But it is advantageous for healthcare as a business. If it is the responsibility of the individual to look after themselves, then healthcare businesses and other corporations like food manufacturers and chemical polluters can push the health responsibility onto the individual, and that also comes with the financial responsibility. This is even worse for healthcare providers. If health is a personal responsibility, then people who lead the way in medicine, researchers and providers, should be the healthiest of everyone, right? So why isn't that the fucking case? The Pitt shows us an exaggerated account of what doctors go through. Exaggerated in that doctors definitely do experience and deal with these personal issues. It's just unlikely that all of them would be working the same shift at the same time. But on the other hand, you never know what someone is dealing with, which is the point. Because of the individualization exacerbated by COVID-19, which was itself a healthcare crisis, we uncovered a secondary ongoing healthcare crisis. The fact that healthcare is kinda shit. And this goes with this myth of personal responsibility for one's injuries and illness. If you top that off with the expectation to be a paragon of health, then the doctors, like the ones depicted in the Pitt, are forced into a position where they don't know how to ask for help without appearing weak in front of their patients or their bosses. In the show, they constantly talk past one another and they offer, but nobody ever takes anybody else up on it. There's a saying the characters throw around a few times.
Physician heal thyself.
It's a good sentiment, but they're not given the resources to do so. If a healthcare provider is unwell in any way, even if it's just burnout, there are only two outcomes. They either become well, which is unlikely, or they become unprofessional. And we see this happen when Dr. Robbie becomes unprofessional by bringing a parent into an active crime scene morgue in order to convince him that his child needs treatment. Effective maybe, but professional? Oh hell no. So why does this matter, other than for the provider's well-being? It matters because healthcare providers in the show are not truly given the resources to do their job effectively. That is, they are given the physical resources to provide care, but not to look after their own needs, which affects their ability to give care. Jack Abbott is having an ongoing mental health crisis, for fuck's sake. Robbie too, but I like Jack more. We demand that these people look after us selflessly. Most people understand that medicine is only one part of healthcare and that healthcare is an interworking network of systems. This means doctors aren't just administering medicine as a kind of technology, but are also looking after patient welfare. In order to do this, providers need to be treated effectively as well. One approach is the practice of teaching resilience, or mental fortitude. This is one's ability to overcome and deal with emotional and psychological stress. This is an important tool, and I want healthcare providers to have it and be given support for it, but the concept of resilience once again undercuts the problem. Resilience is about getting back to normal, but when you look at what's going on in the Pit, it becomes obvious that resilience isn't about getting better, but about maintaining the status quo. It's about treating the symptom rather than treating the cause of those symptoms. And this leads to bad healthcare, and it's indicative of a very real systemic problem. Throughout this video, I've been referring to healthcare providers as a whole rather than just doctors and nurses. The Pit even has a social worker and shows frontline workers as a part of their team. This is important because to positively affect healthcare outcomes for all people, we need to understand that healthcare is a multi-level and complex system that involves more than just biological medicine. This includes the institutions that are put in place to carry out healthcare, hospitals and the like. These institutions, especially in the States, are, I think, the weakest part of the healthcare system. Positive healthcare outcomes for patients occur when patients feel heard and supported and are given time and space to heal. I think it's fitting that we see a female patient with sickle cell because this is a disease that affects Black people, and women, especially of color, are the least likely to feel heard, which leads to the most negative healthcare outcomes. And hospitals like to measure these in patient satisfaction scores. A simple number score on the outcome of a system of interlocking parts is now expected to be foisted on one or two physicians and nurses, which is ridiculous. But as long as hospitals can do this, they will. And I'm not saying the hospital has to take all the responsibility, but if the system involves institutions and people, then both of those parts have to take responsibility, and that means actually putting money into the system and looking after people. But they can get away with acting this way because healthcare, like education and many other things, is seen as a business rather than a service. This might be my leftist socialist hippie bias at work, but an institution that values profits over people sounds like the opposite of describing a hospital. A service, on the other hand, is offered because people need it. It is value added despite money. Hospitals, at least in the USA, work against this idea and do not offer any value unless there is some kind of monetary exchange. They expect healthcare providers to take the brunt of the work by putting in ridiculous amounts of time because otherwise they are uncaring or unprofessional. Meanwhile, they offer useless resources for resilience while changing nothing, which means that they can create problems to either cut costs or directly profit. This is wildly exploitative towards providers and leads to alienation, which is another word for burnout. And if you want to hear more about these topics, check out the videos I have on Monsters, Inc. or Office Space, respectively. This kind of exploitation in healthcare isn't new either. In one of the episodes, a patient comes in and explains that he was a former Freedom House medic. These were the first real EMT professionals in the United States. They revolutionized transport medicine, and they were mostly Black folks who served the poor and mostly Black part of Pittsburgh. This was so successful that the city decided to take up the service, but they displaced all the Black workers without any thanks. They were unceremoniously replaced because the workers were expendable. especially because they were black. But the same story plays out right up until the present. Healthcare is about people. It is about making people better, or at the very least, reducing suffering.
All you can do is focus on the medicine. The medicine's the only thing that saves the patient and your sanity.
Sometimes that's surgery, and sometimes it just calls for talking through your problems with someone. But at the end of the day, it should be a service for people who need it. And that includes providers. This show is slightly heavy-handed with its representation of the realities of an emergency room, but it does point that out.
I can pretty much guarantee you the next one will be easier.
I really fucking hope so.
But the point of the show is that all of these things do and will continue to happen. People will slip through the cracks, and healthcare and frontline workers will continue to be shafted with the responsibility of others' health to the detriment of their own, leading to burnout and a lack of professional and quality care. And the institutions and governments can do something about this, but they choose not to. It blows my mind that during the mass casualty, Gloria, the chief of staff, does whatever she can to support her workers. This is a travesty after all, and her people will deal with it tremendously, because it looks good on her hospital. But as soon as that shitstorm is over, the do more with less song and dance starts up once again. And I'm not saying that she alone is responsible. That's the opposite of what I'm saying. But as long as we continue to treat healthcare as a business, then everyone suffers. The show is a cry for help. A showcase of everything that patients and providers go through all the time. A very compelling, well-written cry for help, but a cry for help. Healthcare needs to be treated as a service, and that means serving people, providers included, and maybe especially. And that is why the Pitt doesn't pull any punches in its depiction of the current status of healthcare. Here are my stray thoughts. I only briefly got to mention the healthcare outcomes of women and people of color. That's probably a whole episode in itself. You should definitely look up the Freedom House ambulance service. It's a fascinating part of medical and black history. As always, there are citations below. Everything that Dr. Abbott does is the best. That man is a treasure. I really enjoy Mel because her story doesn't shy away from how affective the emotional part of healthcare is. I also love the Whitaker Scrubs subplot. Those mass casualty episodes were nuts and really eye-opening, and I cannot wait to see what the next season will showcase.
Hey! Thank you so much for watching that video. I didn't show too much of the actual medicine after the mass casualty shooting because I didn't think the censors would really deal with that well on YouTube, but it's really worth watching. Very effective stuff. I've got lots more ideas coming down the pipe, so don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll never miss another thing right here on Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.